Story 1. Outside of funerals, in person, none that I know of. I have seen bodies loaded into ambulances, and they might have been deceased, but I do not think I have ever just seen a dead person. Story 2. Most people do not see much death, but consider this. Death used to be much more common. You might be closer to a normal person than most others. Story 3. My wife works in a nursing home. She has seen a lot of death in the past 20 years. Every now and then, a resident she really liked will die, and she feels down for a day or maybe two. When her grandmother died 10 years ago, it was a completely different experience. That loss hit hard, even though she encounters death frequently. There is a big difference between these two types of death. Both are painful, but one is far harder than the other. Story 4. It definitely warps your perception of life and death, as most people struggle to accept that death affects us all. But if you see it daily, you understand the cycle better than most. I have lost both my parents, and I am 42. I am far better equipped to handle loss than my wife, who still has her great-grandmother alive. It is all about perception of reality. You have a better grasp than most, but it definitely makes you different, not in a bad way. Story 5. I have seen about 24 deceased individuals during COVID-19. It did not bother me at all. However, the smell is something I will never forget. Story 6. I work at a hospital and have seen several deceased patients. The first one was quite shocking. I adjusted, and it does not bother me as much now. Some of the other things I have seen have been more traumatizing. For example, saving a teenage girl from hanging herself, watching nurses try to save a man who had a head-on collision with a semi-truck, or seeing a man who was shot by a shotgun were far more traumatic for me to witness and handle. Story 7. Death used to be a part of everyday life. Your grandparents would probably be actively dying in the same room you slept in at night. The dying were not so far removed from everyday life as they are in modern times. Story 8. I see dead people, or rather, the remains of people. I have always been okay with seeing adults. The body is just a lump of meat. Children affect you more. I think it does impact us, as it makes death more of an everyday thing. Most people go through their lives avoiding the topic of their own and their loved one's mortality. We do not have that option, as death is part of our jobs. How many does a regular person see? If we are counting funerals, probably about half a dozen. Not counting funerals, probably 0 to 1. Story 9. I worked as a nurse at a veteran's home and sat bedside for 23 transitions in 1 year. It weighed heavily on me. Story 10. Paramedic here. I have seen hundreds. Most of them do not really affect me. Death is inevitable. It is the children that get me. Nobody should have to see a dead child. Story 11. I was a state-tested nursing assistant for more than 20 years. I have seen a lot of death. People who were ready to die and those who did not want to die. I held the hands of many as they took their last breath when family could not be there. I also held the hands of those who begged to stay and did not want to go. Most were older than me, some younger. This was traumatizing, and I believe it affects a person deeply. I feel that nobody should die alone, and I hope I made a difference. I still remember the name of the first person who died, and the last person as well. I don't think I will ever forget them. Story 12. Hate to be that guy, but I have worked fire services, emergency medical services, funeral homes, and emergency rooms for the last 17 years. I have probably seen thousands. No effects. Story 13. I have seen 4. I am 37. Both parents. I saw an overdose at a rave, and I saw a lady commit suicide out of her apartment. Story 14. The average person outside of a funeral might go their entire life without seeing a dead person. Almost all of my friends and I are in firefighting, emergency medical services, law enforcement, or nursing. I am not sure I know any normal people anymore. Story 15. Honestly, it's not dead people that affect you as much as dying people. I still remember watching my grandmother pass away when I was a child. It was exactly like watching one of my pets die. The same struggles to breathe, the different unnerving noises, the flailing. I learned pretty early on that despite all of our impressive achievements as a species, we still all depart the same way as animals. Story 16. I worked both as a medic and in a hospital emergency room. I have seen my fair share of deceased individuals. Death never bothered me. It is a natural part of life, or so I believed. I have heard it called the Great Equalizer. I am also a proud member of Generation X. We were not allowed to express feelings. That is why we do not care about yours. Story 17. Unfortunately, my choice of hobby has led me to see more people die in front of me than I would like. Adding friends and family who have passed away, it is not a large number, but enough to leave a mark. Story 18. A friend's mother overdosed and died. I was the second person on the scene. In the military, I found a fellow who had hung himself and saw his lifeless body. I was present when my father and my father-in-law passed away at their bedside. So, in total, I work in the medical field, and I can say I see more traumatic events in trauma care than from witnessing my father's death. I have seen people being crushed or slashed to death by a knife. The worst thing I saw was a child. We had services provided at my facility for anyone experiencing grief from witnessing these events. On my list is seeing children hurt or dead. No one can really stomach that, honestly. Story 19. I worked in an emergency room. I have seen more than I can count, with ages ranging from 1 hour to 102 years. Story 20. I have seen many deaths because of my job and believe that people like us have a very skewed perspective. Someone like my wife, who is a teacher, may go her entire life without seeing a single body outside of a funeral. Story 21. I have been a critical care nurse for 30 years. I have been close enough to feel the last breath of dozens of people. When I worked with adults, it really did not bother me. However, I worked in the pediatric intensive care unit for a decade and have watched more children die than I care to remember. And yes, it affects your mind. If you have ever seen a child killed by abuse or neglect, then you know good sleep is a thing of the past. And forget religion. It upsets me that every time we have maximized medical therapy, the physician tells the family that it is in God's hands now. Well, if that were our solution, why did I work consecutive 12-hour days to try to save this child's life? Why not just turn off the drips, remove the endotracheal tube, and turn off the ventilator? Then everyone can sit and pray the child gets better while I go drink coffee. Story 22. I have seen people die before, though it's not something I look for. I personally saw 2 people die in front of me. The first was my grandfather. It was horrible. He died in the hospital and they just left his body there. He was yellow. I remember looking at his eyes. They were open, red, dried up, and shriveled like raisins. The second was my sister's baby. She was having her second child and was 8 months pregnant. She said she had clear fluid leaking but didn't know what it was. Her baby passed away, but she still had to give birth. The way the doctors treated her was awful because she didn't have insurance. She sat in the hospital bed for a few hours waiting. She felt a little contraction earlier and asked her friend to check what was happening. Her friend moved the blanket, and her baby was just dead, lying there for who knows how long. That was awful. Story 23. I have been to 37 funerals, and I am 25 years old. They definitely affect your mind in many ways. Everyone I trusted with some very dark secrets has passed away, and now I do not trust anyone to hear my deepest secrets. Not because I think my secrets caused harm, but because they are hardly secrets anymore. At one point, I trusted person with deep things. Now that they are gone, I can free myself from the secrets of my youth, and they no longer have the weight they once did. Experiencing so many deaths has also affected how responsive I am to other people, whether I know them or not. I now actively listen to people to encourage them and hopefully inspire them away from self-harm. Story 24. My wife worked in hospice care for a while and once texted me, "I have 13 patients right now, but I'll only have 7 by Wednesday. Want to do date night?" I think the average person will encounter only a couple over their lifetime. I have seen exactly one. A motorcyclist who lost control on the highway and experienced a sudden crash. Story 25. It likely varies significantly depending on widely different life experiences. I have seen a few deaths at funerals. I have only ever seen someone die once. It was on a dive boat. The man surfaced with a cardiac issue and did not survive. I would say it absolutely changed my perspective on how easily things can happen during what is otherwise a routine day. For others who see death more often, I think it definitely affects them. Neonatal intensive care unit nurses have a high turnover because of the nature of the work. I also remember reading an article about Anderson Cooper and how the amount of death he witnessed when reporting early in his career started to numb him. Story 26. I have seen a dead body twice in my life, but both times I was just driving by. The first time was as a child, around 10 years old. My parents and I were driving when we passed a massive crash. I saw a body halfway through the windshield, and the passenger side had a blood splash. The second time was at a hospital in a room down the hall. So I do not think it really counts. But still. Story 27. It definitely can have an impact on a person. I remember hearing a talk from a world-famous forensic pathologist about his experience with post-traumatic stress disorder. This man was frequently exposed to death. He was regularly flown around the world to work on serious cases, including post-terrorist attacks and mass murders. He was never directly involved in these horrific events but only saw the aftermath, yet it still had a profound impact on his well-being. During the interview, he mentioned how, at home, he was making an iced drink for himself and how the sight of ice perfectly reminded him of a case he worked on in India, where bodies had to be chilled on ice due to a lack of temperature-regulated facilities. That moment at home with the ice was the first time he recognized that something was not quite right with him. He later sought evaluation, was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and received treatment to help manage it. Traumatic events or exposure to traumatic events can take many forms. Some might even sound perfectly normal to the average person, but they can still have a significant impact. Story 28. I am 32 years old, and unless I am forgetting something, I have only seen one dead body, and it was at a funeral viewing. I would be fine if it stayed at that number. Story 29. I used to do removals and realized at some point that I have seen way more deceased individuals than most people have. Story 30. My mother used to work at a funeral home, and on my days off from school, I spent the day at her office. I saw a few deceased bodies there and later at funerals. I also worked at a retirement home where a man died in the middle of a seating service. I held on to him as the ambulance arrived. He was not dead yet, but they performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and I believe he was pronounced dead on arrival. Yes, I was affected by it. But I think I have always been curious and anxious about death and dying. Does it all just stop suddenly? Is there another realm of consciousness even after brain death? I do not know, to tell the truth, but I often feel the weight of life's impermanence. Story 31. I have seen two cases, both family members. I work in healthcare, and I think seeing a lot of anything affects you. I sit watching someone's blood gases look objectively awful and just shrug. I then need to remind myself how bad it is compared to healthy individuals. Story 32. I've seen a handful, mainly friends and family. I think it could affect you in the sense that after too many, maybe you lose the early feeling of walking into a room and sensing the death inside. For me, when I see a dead body, I get strange bodily sensations, as if something is not normal and I feel jittery. If I worked around many bodies, such as in your profession, I would probably lose that sensation or feeling when around the dead. Story 33. Good question. I would think the context of how you come to see deceased individuals matters. A medical examiner probably gets used to it and is not affected as much as someone who works in a nursing home and knows them as people first. I suppose as natural, primitive humans, we saw more death throughout our lifespan. Story 34. I did charity work in Brazil, working with the favelas, teaching English and basic living skills along with other things. I saw a body nearly every week. People left this mortal plane in violent ways, usually instigated by cartels. Several colleagues had post-traumatic stress disorder because of it. I believe I did too, but became jaded after a while. Resilience and grit play a big role in how a person handles it. I was there for 2.5 years. Story 35. Part of my job is driving a truck, and I see dead bodies more often than I thought I would. Probably 2 to 3 a year, and I don't drive that often. Most are vehicle accidents, but I have seen one this year before the ambulance arrived. Story 36. I have seen a decent amount as a former emergency medical technician. I will say the time I watched a patient die left an effect on me. The eyes change. Story 37. Other than funerals, which are somewhat more common than they once were, I only saw 2 people die in my late teens. My ex-wife, however, conducts research in the oral and maxillofacial space and teaches, so at any one time she might have around 20 heads in her lab. She did a lot of emergency room work early in her career as well. I would say she has a more functional, even mechanical, view of the human body, whereas I think of it as a personal instrument. Her early career experience certainly influences her fears about what could happen to our children. Story 38. Outside of watching family members pass away and attending funerals, I have driven through one accident and seen 2 others. The accident I drove through involved a collision on Highway 65 in northern Alabama. A vehicle traveling on the southbound side heading north lost control and crashed head-on into a tanker truck. The largest intact piece of the vehicle was approximately the size of an extra-large pizza box. Story 39. I have honestly lost count of the bodies I have seen. I do not think it has much of an effect on me except for the times it has been a friend or family member. It is the fate of us all. Today him, tomorrow may be me. Such is life. Story 40. I am 45 years old and have never seen a dead person up close that I can remember. It is possible I went to an open casket or 2 as a young child and just do not remember seeing the body. But as far as I can recall, the most I have seen is a body covered by a sheet at a car accident or an open casket of my wife's relative, which I did not approach. My wife has seen many dead bodies working in the hospital. Story 41. Except for open casket visitations and funerals, the average person sees only a small number. I saw my mother when she died at home. I will probably see my father when his time comes. The in-laws, maybe. Story 42. My parents are both in their 70s, and they have attended over 30 funerals and wakes. I always wonder how they manage to stay strong after losing so many people. Story 43. I live in the nation of off-duty police officers. I have seen many bodies. As to how it affects the mind, my experience is that the type of dead body makes more of an impression than the quantity. Is it a person under a black tarp on the side of the road after being run over? That is less impactful. Is it a bloated corpse being retrieved from the sea with eyes eaten by fish? Yes, that causes bad dreams. Story 44. I have seen a lot, but I work in trauma, intensive care units, and surgery, so it is not uncommon for me. However, I realize it is a lot for many to consider. Story 45. Makes me feel for those who have to pick up bodies in civilian and military duties. We have a unique problem on the other end of the spectrum. Birth certificates require a special printer, and when someone accidentally prints coupons, it is kind of a big deal. Story 46. I have found a few dead bodies and 1 dying man, which I am told is a lot for someone who is not working in emergency services or the military. Once you know what a rotten human corpse smells like, you cannot forget it. The last body I found, all the neighbors thought it was a sewer problem. I was helping a family member move in 2 doors down. I stepped out of the truck and immediately knew there was a body nearby. Story 47. I see too many at work myself, over 1,000 or more. Before that, in the wild, only 2 in more than 40 years. Funerals do not count. One was a friend's family member infant, less than 1 year old. I attempted resuscitation post-mortem, it turns out. Yes, it affected me. I was much too young and ill-prepared. The other was a found elder in the course of my previous job. No, it did not affect me. It might have helped with getting this job, however. Because of the work, I think about death all the time. Story 48. I would say yes, it does affect some people, but in that industry you either have it or not. Some people do not care and just carry on with their day. Story 49. I think I am normal, and the only time I saw a dead person was at my friend's father's funeral with an open casket. I may have seen a dead homeless person in the subway and thought they were sleeping. I don't think I could handle being around a lot of death, to be honest. Story 50. Grandparents, parents, maybe uncles and aunts, and close family friends, maybe 10 people in total. Of course, it changes you, but I think the biggest impact is probably felt when they are confronted with deceased people at a very young age. Story 51. I am 32 years old and volunteer in a low-volume emergency service. I have seen 3 freshly deceased bodies. In my paid work, I have been made aware of probably more than 100 very recently deceased people. We transport dialysis patients and others to their appointments. Story 52. It's definitely sobering, and I imagine if you become numb to the natural fear of death and what it is represented by, such as corpses, then you would be affected and your outlook would change. Story 53. I do not really care about deceased individuals I have seen, but dying people are the sort of thing that bothers me. Once they are deceased, they are just heavy medical waste. Dying people are in pain and trying to hold on, but a deceased person is a slab of meat in the shape of a person. Story 54. I saw a man who had jumped or fallen off a bridge being attended to by emergency medical technicians. I assumed he was dead. I saw a deceased man being pulled out of a remote shelter on a backboard. I saw another man being treated by search and rescue while hiking in the desert who later died. I have attended funerals for my great-grandparents and an uncle. My father saw a man get decapitated and also found his stepfather after he died by suicide. There may have been another incident, but I am not sure, and it would have been less significant. Story 55. I am in my early 30s, and so far I have been lucky enough to never have to see death in person. Photos, yes. Animals, yes. But so far, no humans. I do come from a culture where death is not only normalized but also very hands-on for the family of the loved one. My father has seen and handled many bodies before he came to our current country, where that is no longer normal. So I suppose normal is different in this regard, depending on the context. Story 56. I am 45 years old, and I am a combat veteran. I have seen hundreds, maybe thousands, of bodies in my time, many of them before they were dead. I am definitely not okay. Story 57. Hi OP. I do not really know the answer to your question, but I do enjoy discussions around death and our culture's fear of it. Caitlin Dowdy had a YouTube channel called Ask a Mortician. She has also written several books, one in particular you may be interested in, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, which recounts her experience witnessing a death when she was young and how it shaped her worldview, as well as her experiences as a cremation machine operator. Story 58. Oh yeah, it affects the mind. I was combat arms in the military, and death has seemed to trigger a disconnect switch in my brain. Even with those close to me, I don't seem to experience grief the way I see others experience it. Story 59. I work at a tissue bank, so I get to see a lot. I am sure it will affect me later in life, but right now I am okay. Pays my bills. Story 60. I am in my 40s and have seen one dead body in my entire life, at my grandmother's funeral when I was a little child. Story 61. I was a medical professional in the military and served in Iraq and Afghanistan. In Iraq, I worked in a combat support hospital, and in Afghanistan, I was embedded in an Afghan military hospital. I saw many dead and dying Americans, Allied forces, and Afghans. I remember pieces of humans lying on the gurney, such as a forearm and hand. I specifically recall one young American calling out for his mother. I witnessed soldiers coming through the hospital whose heads had been crushed and were deformed because the high-mobility multipurpose wheeled vehicle they were in was going too fast and rolled over. I have many images from those days. I am not trying to be someone who says, I've seen some stuff, but I definitely think about those people a lot, lives taken too early and, in retrospect, for no reason. I am proud of my service, but I now firmly believe that war does not solve anything. Story 62. I have seen it more than a few times now through work. They become less of a deceased person and more of a patient. Most of the time, it is not a big deal at all, but every once in a while, it is not pleasant. Story 63. The last dead body I saw was my grandfather in his coffin. He died in 2005 and I was 11. I am 31 now and have not seen a body in 20 years. That being said, people in my life have died suddenly. I just have not seen it. The most recent was an elderly neighbor who had cancer and died at home about a year ago. I saw the ambulance but not the actual body and had no idea what happened until my father brought it up a few days later. Death is definitely not a normal thing if you do not have a job that involves it. I think it does dull you to the experience after a while. My memory of my grandfather's funeral is fuzzy at best. but I just remember noting that he looked like he was asleep. I was too young to process what was really happening at the time. Story 64. I'm on about 250 cases this year. I understand how you feel. I see you're a firefighter/paramedic. Please reach out to your coroner or medical examiner personnel if you ever feel like you need closure on a case that didn't resolve or need answers, or just want to talk to people who deal exclusively with death like we do. Seeing things from your perspective, where you can actively lose patients in real time, is harder in my opinion because in death investigation there is no rush. It is our responsibility to slow these scenes down and begin the transition from emergency to investigation. We care about you and wish that our firefighter, emergency medical services, and police department family would utilize us more often and include us more, because more often than not, we get left out of everything since we are not viewed as first responders by the general public until it is time for a deceased body. Story 65. It affects a person's perspective, not necessarily their mind. Traumatic scenes of death, such as war, can definitely affect a person's mental health, but simply being exposed to death itself does not. I have seen more than 10 dead bodies at 23 years old, and I would say it gives me an appreciation for how fleeting life can be. Story 66. It definitely affects you. I remember the names and faces of every patient I have ever lost. In Game of Thrones, Arya has a list she recites every night of people she plans to kill. I have a list like that, except it is every person I have ever watched die. It runs through my head in every quiet moment. Story 67. A man was shot in the head and bled out on my driveway when I was 9 years old. It definitely changed how I perceive death and life-threatening situations. I did not even notice until the last couple of years. Story 68. Hotel manager at the time. I have seen one. I can still see her eyes while I tried cardiopulmonary resuscitation, as clear as day. I can feel my body lift her off the couch. I imagine if I had to deal with more, I might become desensitized. But as it is, the novelty has made it stick. It makes me terrified of finding anyone I love in the same state. I knew the moment I looked in her eyes that she was gone. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation was just going through the motions. Story 69. I know someone who has been around many people who violently met their end. They have only opened up a few times, but I know there is more and worse that they have seen. Even if they put it in the back of their mind and say it is part of their job, I am sure it has affected them. Story 70. I work in a high-acuity area in a hospital, so I see many deceased people. I have had this conversation with my high school friends who mostly work in information technology. The answer is zero, other than at funerals. It certainly affects my mind. I am fairly numb to it, but it has the side effect of making me prone to inappropriate conversations at bad times, like over dinner or in front of people who might not be old enough to process it. I just have to watch what I say. Story 71. I have only seen one in the wild. It did not change me. I was about 9 years old, so I already had a good understanding of life and death. Story 72. I've worked in emergency medical services and now work in the emergency room, so I see death quite often. I think most people in their life will see at least 1 or 2 dead people, but that is a stretch, and this does not include family and friends passing. As for the last part of this question, yes, I think it changes a person's mind and way of thinking. I, for example, do not see the dead or dying the way I first did when I started this career. You could say I am a bit numb to it. I also think I have become slightly colder. At least that is what I have been told. Story 73. In person, I think 6. I have seen a lot of homeless people die from overdoses. We have a pretty bad homeless drug problem. I do not really know if it has affected me that much, to be honest. Probably has, and I just have not noticed. Story 74. I think I have only ever seen one dead person in real life, my grandmother at her viewing. I helped bring my aunt's coffin to her grave, but it was closed the whole time. On the other hand, I do not think it is strange for people to be in lines of work where it is quite frequent. Those are normal jobs like doctors, emergency workers, or people who work in the funeral and death industry. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.